The first thing I want to get into is your management company, man. Wolf Sports Management. Like, talk about the genesis of that project.
Yeah, so just to give a brief synopsis or background on how I got started with this, I mean, I went to uh, Brooklyn Law School after graduating from college, and I've always been interested in combat sports. And in fact, in the summer of 2007, I summered at a firm in Las Vegas where one of the partners was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission. So I got my first exposure into the MMA industry vis-a-vis him. And it's something that I was always interested in, and I always paid attention to the legal and regulatory aspects of MMA. And a few years ago, when Marcus Surin was starting to come into his own with his own career, he got to a point where he asked me to help him with getting fights and just being his manager and started helping him. And he was my only guy for a few years. And eventually, people saw what I was doing with him, got him fights at Bellator, got him sponsorships, and I trained at Renzo Gracie, and eventually, actually, it was Naaman Gracie. He put me in contact with Tiago Hella, and that's how I ended up helping him out with managing him. And along with that, Hobson Gracie put me in touch with Talita Noguera and Aurelio Pimenta, who was her translator and my partner with Talita. And so it was really over the course of this year where things started to take off. And after the Bellator event this past couple of weeks ago, I signed a bunch of new guys that were in Talita's camp, and hopefully have a few more to announce in the next few days, actually.
Marcus, he's your first guy, first
Yes.
client. How did you meet him? Did you meet him on the mats? Were you training with him? Is that how you got connected?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. Funny story to that because so I wrestled in high school back in like I graduated in 2001 and in Scarsdale, and he wrestled in the same section as me. So he wrestled for East Ramapo. He was a multiple time section champ, and I remembered who he was, and it was through a mutual friend. One of his coworkers, he works at a you know financial institution in the city, introduced us, and we got together over dinner once, and we were kind of chatting, and then I was connecting the dots, and I was like, "Wait a minute, are you the Marcus Cern, Section One Marcus Cern?" And that's when it just kind of hit, and the rest is history. We just went off, just nerding out on Section One. I still feel bad for our friend. We totally neglected her in that conversation because we were just totally catching up on all things wrestling and MMA. And I mean, I mean, more than just being his manager, he's one of my brothers, and I could say that really. I'm looking forward to saying that for all of my fighters. I want to be able to treat them like family and so forth.
Now, picking it up, the last year, signing all these guys. Why Wolf Sports? Where does that name come from?
So have you ever seen Pulp Fiction?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So if you remember the character played by Harvey Keitel, the Wolf, and
Yeah.
that's exactly where I got my inspiration from because that character is just down to business. He knows how to prioritize. He's a tactician. He he introduces himself as I'm Winston Wolf. I solve problems, and that's really a lot of how he functions in that movie is really how I vision a good manager functioning as well. They see a problem, they take care of it. They're quick, they're decisive, and they're able to solve any problems as they see fit. And my first experience with something similar to that wasn't obviously hiding a dead body, of course. But uh, for one of Marcus's fights last year, we're about to check in at the venue, and he's fighting in like an hour and a half, and he looks at me like, "Boss, I forgot my cup." It's like, "What?" And, I mean, he needs his cup to fight, obviously, and so I had to look up like the nearest sporting goods store. It was like an hour away, and just like in the movie, I just zoomed over. I got there in like half an hour and got back with like a bunch of different cup sizes. Grabbed them, zoomed back, and like here are your cups in like half an hour, split second time. And so like after that, it reminded me of of the wolf getting to and from where he needs to be in like a short amount of time, and just that's a lot of how the problems you encounter. Like they come up, but you just got to be able to solve them, and oftentimes in on short notice. And I'm actually in the middle of dealing with something right now in terms of getting the blood work for a fighter that's fighting on the Israel card this week, just making sure that's handled in a timely fashion.
A lot of fighters, they don't have managers. They kind of handle everything on their own, and some of them do have managers, and they don't know how to handle things for the fighter. It seems like because, like you
Yeah.
just mentioned, blood work, visas, these all these things can become huge problems for a fighter that fights internationally. For yourself, you know what I mean? Like, do you see that happening a lot in the industry? Like managers that don't know how to handle things, but they're managers in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it happen plenty of times, even at the highest levels. You see it happen even in the UFC. Sometimes there are visa issues, and a lot of times it's not even the managers themselves or the fighters. It's just the bureaucracy and paperwork that surrounds the whole visa process that can just gum things up and just take forever to move forward. I mean, I'm sure, given that it's a complex issue, it's even difficult for me to navigate sometimes. That there are managers that just aren't as familiar with it. But I think for the most part, all the top guys are able to handle that pretty well and efficiently.
I saw a post by another manager. I think he is part of one of the major management companies out in Europe, and he was talking about how important it is to have a manager, but the right manager. Like there's a
Hmm.
lot of guys out there that are trying to be managers. Now, how did you get over that hump? There's that in between, like there's the guys that are, you've had your I guess your time as a small time manager, right? And trying to get fighters to join you and trust you and rely on you. And now you're kind of over that hump, and you got a bunch of guys under your
Yeah.
umbrella. How do you get over that hump? How did you get guys to kind of trust you to sign on?
I think it's just it's largely through word of mouth and just seeing me in action. Like when you manage someone, the way I look at it, you're not just managing the fighter, you're also managing their entire camps and families. I want to make sure that the family's okay, that the coaches are all on the same page with each other, and make sure everyone is operating together in as one cohesive unit. And as I mentioned before, like I think that's how Naaman and Hobson saw me function with Marcus, and they saw enough of it to think highly enough of me to recommend me to Tiago and Talita, and that's snowballed since. And the way I managed to get all these new guys recently was working with Talita's camp this past fight for Bellator. I had a very good rapport with the entire team, and her head coach, Yokohama Mura, out of Point of Impact MMA. We got along very well. We worked in sync very well together, and not long after her fight, he spoke to me about helping some more of his guys, and so it's just about seeing me in action and letting my reputation both grow and speak for itself.
With the fighters that you have, I think in management, it's not about wins and losses because that's kind of on the fighter, right? Your
Mhm.
side is to kind of before the fight and after the fight. But all of that stuff kind of meshes together, the wins and losses and the management side. Like when recently a lot of your fighters have come off on the wrong side of a fight. What do you
Mhm.
do? Like how do you kind of do you go there and do you comfort them? Do you kind of give them their space? Like how do you handle all of that?
Yeah, it's like a touch and feel type of
Mm.
thing. Yeah, you're right, and the way. I would look at it is that as a manager, you're kind of like a professional handler, and like I have a good sixth sense, I like to say, about dealing with people, and it's easy to be a manager or coming up a win, right? Like everyone's happy, everyone's celebrating, and no real problem. But it's in times like this where it's I think what differentiates a good manager from perhaps a subpar one, and it's just about just knowing your fighters, being there for them, talking to them, and just knowing how to speak to them and having understanding of where you need to come from and how you approach them. And these guys are honestly the professional athletes, and like they're tough as nails. And I didn't really need to do much for them. Like Marcus and Talita, they both had tough losses, but they've gone through tougher in their lives. To be honest with you, they do this every day, and like of course they're disappointed. Of course they're frustrated, but they're as mentally tough as anyone I know. If anything, they were more concerned for me sometimes, and like I can't feel bad about it if they themselves aren't feeling bad about it. And of course, I'm still there to make sure that they're okay, their camp's okay, and again, it's not just them, it's their spouses, it's their families, their coaches. I want to make sure that everyone's okay and just thank them for what they did, keeping them safe in and out of the cage, and just keep them encouraged because there's a lot to build off of. They are better fighters exiting the cage than when they came in, and it's on to the next one. There's always another fight. Losses will come, but so will the wins, and ideally more wins than losses. And I believe in all my guys, and I'm excited for them. Win, lose or draw, they have great things coming for them.
Who are the newest additions to your team? Can you talk
Mhm.
about them a little bit, and maybe have they got some fights lined up or anything like that?
Yeah, so it's a bunch of new guys. First is George Becerra. He's welterweight. He's got a very established record, 21-13. He's fighting out of Brazil. I have uh, and these guys coming up are out of Point of Impact, Talita's camp. I have Tommy Ferguson, heavyweight, Darren Smith, lightweight, Jared Connor, featherweight, Kali Benjamin, who's also lightweight, and Jordan Frank, who's middleweight. And Jared, he has a fight in Bellator coming up in January at the Forum. So I'll be out for them for him for that card, and ideally, if spots open up, can get some of those other California guys on that card as well.
How do you handle getting new guys added to your team? Of course, you have the connection with Talita, but let's say a fighter reaches out from Russia, or
Right.
from France, and that's a big distance, between you and them. Would you be open to managing guys from other countries, or even out in Asia?
Oh, of course, I absolutely would be. I'm certainly not in the business of saying no, but I would. The, no matter where they are, the important thing for me is even if they say like, "Oh, I want to sign with you. Can you manage me?" I prefer to talk to them first, give them an introduction on who I am, how I go about doing things. I'd like to get to know them a little bit, and I want them to be able to make an informed decision about me, not just kind of blindly sign on. As much as I appreciate the enthusiasm, I would prefer for them to know what they are getting out of me, and no matter where they are in the world, that's uh, that's something I look forward to working with. It's Fighting is a universal language, and any language barriers that's not something Google Translate or finding a translator can't assist with.
With interviews, with fighters getting interviews, a lot of fighters, they don't want to do interviews. They don't want to talk to people. They just want to train and fight. What is your protocol, so to say, on getting your fighters to do interviews? And how do you pick and choose who to do the interviews with? Of course, I've interviewed a lot of your guys, but like, let's say another person reaches out. Do you kind of go and research them, or do you just say, okay, just just do the interviews, get practice in. You need the practice because when you become a bigger fighter, a bigger star,
Mm,
you're gonna have to do media all day, every day, and you gotta get used to that.
yeah. I mean, I would do research to some extent on whoever requests to interview just to make sure it's not like some random or like weird guy that doesn't even necessarily have their best interests at heart. But in terms of like how I would advise them uh, in the interview space, I think it's also about like timing. Like if they have something coming up in like a week or two, that's when say I'd be like reach out to you and like, hey, if like Marcus or Talita, they have a fight coming up in a couple of weeks. Why don't you? I think it'd be a good time for them to have them. And like probably next month, I'll have Jared um, on with you. And for the people that don't want to, and I've experienced that. It's hashtag fighter. Sometimes you have to deal with their personality. Sometimes it's hard to rope them in. Sometimes I don't try to force the issue, but I do try to recommend to them like if I do believe it'll be a good chance for them to get exposure, a good chance, as you mentioned, to practice their interviewing skills and uh, being used to having a microphone or interviewer speaking to them because hey, it's a they're professional athletes. It's a visible activity that they are doing, and it's part of the job description. You look at some sports, all the mainstream sports, it's literally required, like post game interviews, and a lot of times they get in trouble for not doing so. But I think it's something that they should try to have fun with. It's a good way to uh, express themselves and let their fans see a side of themselves that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to present. And I would like them to think that it's like a cool activity for them to do and to ultimately develop their brand.
In Korea, right, the management and all this stuff is a huge mess right now. Like it's been a mess for so long and there's lots of problems going on. And you as a Korean, and as a manager, would you be interested in signing Korean fighters, up and coming prospects, to kind of guide them a little bit better? And especially a
Oh,
lot of them want to fight in America.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I mean, that's one of my goals in the coming years to get some Asia-based fighters and specifically Korean fighters. That would be a huge boon for me and to be able to help them and ideally Korean MMA at large. A lot of my I know Hobson likes to call me like the Asian Ali, as in Ali Abdulaziz, and
Okay.
that's an honor for to be mentioned in the same breath as him. He's one of the biggest managers in the sport, probably the biggest manager in the sport, and to follow in those footsteps would be fantastic. Certainly, as it pertains to giving more exposure to Korean fighters, because I think it's still largely an untapped market. I know you have Korean Zombie, Duo Choi, and some other up and comers, but to a large extent, I think we're still waiting to see a lot of great fighters to come out of there, and it's an untapped market for fighters. And I know UFC is coming to Busan in December, and I think that'll be a great showcase for those fighters. And to the extent I can assist some of those local fighters in getting that exposure, I would love to.
Because it seems like I know you have a great relationship with Bellator, and Bellator is gonna have a show at the end of their first ever show in Asia at the end of December in Japan. And
Hmm.
I've heard Coker talking about, yeah, we're gonna start doing shows or in Asia, more shows in Asia, and he mentioned Korea and I think he mentioned China also. Um, with that, in the future, I think it's going to be huge for you with that great connection with Bellator to have some fighters ready in the chamber, to get those cards filled up, right?
Oh, absolutely, and I like that terminology that you use. Just keep having them in the chamber because my guys, for the most part, they're always in the chamber, ready, locked up, ready to go. And yeah, that would be a fantastic opportunity for any of my current guys, any guys that I may sign in the future. It would be fantastic to provide them that showcase there. And in addition to having contacts with Bellator, I chat with people that won a championship, and I also with Sean Shelby at the UFC. So just cross promotions, I always maintain chatter with all of them. It's Bellator's been the one that I've been able to get my guys in the most at this point, but whether it's them or any of the other promotions, absolutely, that would be a fantastic opportunity for them and for myself, quite frankly.
Yeah, especially like you mentioned that you do, you have that relationship with Bellator. You do have that rapport with Sean Shelby, and you got those connections to one championship. Nowadays, fighters, it seems like that's the top three. Do you believe that? Do you feel that with fighters? Like those are the top three promotions that these guys want to get to?
Yeah, I would say that's. I mean, those are the big names that everyone knows across the line. There are certainly other major promotions such as
Yeah.
PFL and also like in North America, Combat Americas is
Mhm.
up and coming promotion that's growing as well. So and that's great. I think uh, as much as I want those like the big three, if you will, to continue to grow. It would be fantastic for some of the more some of the newer promotions to continue to grow as well, because ultimately that everyone wins in that regard. It's more competition means more opportunities for fighters, and that will grow the sport, and that will increase purse sizes and ultimately draw more athletes to the sport. And I think it's again, it'll be great for everyone involved.
Yeah, Combates Americas, they seem like they're not just signing uh Hispanic fighters or Spanish or Mexican fighters. It seems like they're also signing Asian fighters because you see
Mhm.
the Korean gangster Park. I forgot his name off the top of my head, but Park, he's fighting over there, which is it was a huge surprise to a lot of people. Like, how did he even get connected to them? Do you see that happening more? Like Combates America signing, fighters from Asia or from Europe or whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're growing pretty quickly. I mean, they have a pretty big event coming up in like in December, for example. They have was it Tito Ortiz versus uh what's his name, the wrestler
Del Rio or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, Alberto Del Rio. And yeah, it's an interesting matchup
Mhm.
for it's something you'd see like in the old Pride days, and even like as you mentioned, like non-Hispanic based fighters. Like in fact, I just sent them my updated roster today, and it would be great to get some of my guys onto that show and get that exposure for them and help them put on a great show because my guys are certainly ready and in the chamber as you mentioned before.
The big three like we mentioned, and then you got the next level upcoming promotions like PFL and you know it seems like PFL is mostly centered around North America and Europe, and they do have a little international flavor from Asia and stuff like that. What do you see as the future for PFL? Do you have a growing relationship with them to kind of like pump some of your fighters into that league?
Not as much with PFL, or at least it's been a while since I've spoken to the PFL guys. As you know, they were WSOF previously, and I've spoken to Ray Seff a long time ago, but I haven't reached out to them at this point. I know they switched up their kind of business model to have that $1 million tournament, which obviously would be nice to get my
Mhm.
guys into that. But I think that that is a unique thing that they have going on for them, just to stick with that tournament format for their events. As you make it recall, Bellator did that a long time ago, and I think that's always that the tournament structure will always be a unique aspect of the sport. And Bellator's doing it right now with, for example, they just did it with their welterweights for the title. And so when you have that kind of prize pool in an organization, that's always going to draw people, and hopefully it sticks and they are in the black in terms of the revenue and everything. Because if that grows again, like if you want the best fighters, it's like in Jeremy Maguire, you got to show them the money. Like no one's going to want to fight for like $10,000 tournament when you see athletes in all the major sports getting paid tens of millions of dollars. Even in boxing, I mean, you saw that like Canelo just got $30 million for his previous fight. So I think, but what people forget though is also that MMA is a very very young sport, and even in the way it is in its modern format, it's even younger because you remember the original like UFCs. That wasn't MMA. It was definitely more of a spectacle than it was a true athletic endeavor. And what it is now, like you have major sponsors now. You have all the major press coverage in ESPN, for example. And I think like people were talking about how like the like mid 2000s were like the golden age of was the golden age of MMA, and I get that. It was definitely a fun time to be a fan just because you had these stacked cards. But now you have MMA on all the time. Again, you have growing exposure, and I think MMA's best years are yet to come, and it's exciting to be a part of that for sure.
Stacked cards. I think right now you get stacked cards. It's incredible the type of cards that Ryzen can put on, and then one championship will put on these crazy title matches in one, like four title matches in one
Uh,
card, and then you got UFC's putting on pay-per-views where you got, you know, the top guys just going at it, and then you
mhm.
got Bellator with them. They also got the top guys in the world fighting for their divisions. It's spread out so much better now.
Yeah,
And then you got the $1 million tournament with PFL, which is very attractive to any fighter. Like, hey, why not go in there and test yourself against the guys and maybe win $1 million? And even Bellator has the $1 million that they're giving
yep,
away for,
yep,
Douglas Lima. Like I feel that Douglas Lima is probably the, like, pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world,
absolutely.
and he doesn't get enough credit. But hey, when you got $1 million and two belts, I don't think you need that much credit. You know what I mean?
And when people see people fighting for $1 million, they're gonna know, and they're going to get that visibility. And again, it'll draw more attention to the fighters, so that's great for them, and it'll draw more attention to the sport itself, which will be great for the promotions. And yeah, you're right. You'll get all these more stacked and stacked cards, and I think you've been seeing that more these days because you've been seeing a lot of growth in some of these other promotions, such as Bellator and One, not just the UFC. And for example, Bellator does. They had some great signings. They signed Nick Newell, who's a great fighter, and it took him. He should have been signed by a major promotion a long time ago, in my opinion. And it's great that he has a great deal with Bellator now. And I don't know if you saw it, but Sam Weatherford just signed with a manager. He wants to jump into MMA. Aaron Pico obviously is one of the young prospects at Bellator, and uh, these promotions do a great job in developing their talent as well. It's like a lot of times you'll see some of the more local regional guys on the prelims or like the lower end of the main card. Like for example, that's why you see guys like Marcus, Tiago, Talita out there, and even like in like regionally, like in Connecticut, Mike Kimball's another young stud of a fighter. So it's exciting to see like those veterans that are in there, like holding down the fort in the main card, and seeing some of these young guns come up as well.
All right, Michael. Well, if a fighter's watching this, he doesn't have a manager, or if he's thinking about, making a switch to a high level manager like yourself, how would they get in contact with you and maybe, get at you directly and get some, get a conversation going?
Yeah, at this point, I think they could just drop me a line directly. I'm pretty active on my Instagram, MK4019. My Twitter is MKMMA, and certainly happy to speak or have a conversation with anyone that might be interested in having me work with them.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much, man, for the time, and I'm looking forward to you, spreading your wings and getting international with it, and maybe coming out to one championship or to Ryzen, or maybe do you have where do you plan on going the rest of the year? Are you gonna stay in your home base, or do you plan on going to any events before the end of the
Uh,
year?
I think if anything comes up, I might travel. I definitely already in the books. I will be in LA in January, so that's just a couple of months away for the Bellator event there. And 2020, it's going to be a great year for Wolf Sports Management for myself, and especially for all my fighters. Keep an eye out for them, and certainly I'll looking forward to having them speak with you as well.